Diagnosing Mercedes electronic cruise control systems. In 1974, Mercedes came out with their first cruise control option, but it wasn't a Mercedes system. The system was actually supplied by Philco and it was used in Ford vehicles. But Mercedes had figured out how to adapt it to the 107, the 116, and the 114. I still haven't seen a 115 with this system, but it relied heavily on vacuum to make it work. Although I think it was optional on the 115. Now this system was superseded by a VDO system in 1976. And the VDO system used a giant vacuum canister and a control box, and it was an okay system, but it was still vacuum regulated. It was still loose speed. It was still not that great of a system. It sort of worked, but not like a modern system. And then in 1980, VDO came out with this system for Mercedes where they switched the vacuum-controlled cruise control unit to an electronically controlled unit using this amplifier that went under the dashboard, or if you have a 201, under the passenger footwell. Now this amplifier does a lot of work, and understanding how it fails and where the symptoms of it might be failing are coming from versus when you have a bad actuator are a little bit tricky to diagnose. But we're going to go through the steps of diagnosing each of these in this short video, and hopefully you will be able to diagnose your cruise control problems in the future based on this information. Let's go through a couple of scenarios and we'll determine which of these two components it could be, or if it's a tertiary component. The first symptom that we get quite a bit is you touch the cruise control stalk and nothing happens. Now before you start eliminating parts in the system, it's a good idea to go get a little hook tool and remove your instrument cluster. Make sure that the speed sensor in the back of the speedometer is plugged in. On cars with an electronic speedometer, this is a single pole individual wire, and on cars with a mechanical speedometer, it's a two-pole plug that plugs into the back of the speedometer. In addition, you should make sure that your cruise control stalk is not floppy, because that could indicate it has broken contacts in it. And finally, you should make sure that the linkage is attached to this thing, which on a 603 or 102 engine where this is buried under the intake, this can be a little hard. You want to make sure everything's in place. Now, if all of these things are in place and you have nothing, the first thing I would recommend is remove the amplifier. Send the amplifier to a reputable rebuilder. There are a couple of guys who do this. There's Programma, which does quite a few of these. There's cruisecontrolrepair.com, who is my preferred rebuilder. The person who works at Cruise Control's name is Chris, and that's Chris with the K-R-I-S, and he's really good. That's where I send all of my Mercedes electronics. And then there's Stone at Automotive Archaeology, and he's an electrical engineer, so I'm hoping he knows what he's doing. Stone hasn't been doing this that long, but I think with his background, he shouldn't have an issue rebuilding a cruise control amplifier. Now, these amplifiers have electrocaps on their board that tend to go bad, and there are a lot of tutorials about rebuilding them. They're a little tricky to change, but you can also open the can out and slide the guts out of the bottom. Or if you have a 1986 and newer car, you can buy one from Mercedes along with the relay required. So you can buy brand new ones. Now let's say you're dealing with a car that has another strange symptom. The cruise control operates for about 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, then cuts out all of a sudden. This sort of problem is usually linked to an amplifier issue where you have, again, a failure of one of the electrocaps in the circuit board or a broken solder joint, because as the system starts to work, the joints get hot and they expand and they can break. Diagnosing broken solder joints is an art. You have to have good vision and a lot of patience to do it. But that could be a potential problem, although it's not the only potential problem. Another problem that we get quite a bit with cruise controls is surging, and surging can come from a number of areas. The first one could be bad taillight bulbs, so either a burned out bulb or a cheap Chinese bulb that's the wrong wattage, which can interfere with the grounding system for the cruise control and really mess with how efficiently the system functions. Another key component to take into consideration when this happens, especially if you have a 124, is the taillight grid. The taillight grid on the 124 can short out, causing weird cruise control problems. And we've seen it on a lot of 124s. Now, if you have another weird issue where the cruise control will accelerate, but as soon as you take your finger off the button, it stops accelerating, this is usually an amplifier issue as well. And with this discussion, we've covered the three main amplifier issues. There are two other weird issues that amplifiers do that aren't so common, but you need to be aware of them. The first one is infinite acceleration mode, where you put the cruise control on and it just keeps accelerating upward. Now, if you have a 240D, this isn't as big of an issue because you can just hit the brake pedal and cancel it. But there have been scenarios where the brake pedal has not been an effective means of canceling this problem. And so your best bet when this sort of thing happens, your absolute best bet, is to try decelerating the cruise control or turning the cruise control off via the stock. And if that doesn't work, then you put your car in neutral and shut it off. And you can either pull the cruise control fuse or disconnect the linkage, not where it attaches the cruise control actuator, but where it attaches to the throttle linkage itself, so it can't jam anything. When you have infinite acceleration mode, it's almost always an amplifier issue. And usually when this happens to an amplifier, I prefer to just get another amplifier out of my stash and repair it. Again, this is rare, but because I drive a disproportionately large number of vintage Mercedes, I have seen it about 10 times in my life, and that's enough to be concerned about it. So you should be watching out. Now, with the actuator, we're going to talk about some actuator issues that are present as well. Let's say you rebuild your amplifier and nothing happens and your speed sensor is hooked up. Well, you next go to the actuator. The actuator is always second. And if you Google Mercedes cruise control actuator test, there's a simple test where you could measure the resistances between all these pins that'll actually tell you if your actuator is bad. And there's another test that allows you to apply voltage to them to see if the motor and the clutch inside the cruise control amp are working. But there's some other weird things that these guys do. These have a motor in them. In here, this big casing is a motor. And this motor can get weak over time. So if you put in a new amplifier and your actuator is weak, you will slowly lose power. Or the engagement will be really weak. Or instead of the actuator responding when you're going over a hill, it just doesn't respond and you lose speed. So more often than not, these are not amplifier problems, but weak actuator problems. Another major problem that we see with cruise control actuators is the actuator clutch staying engaged. Now this can either be a mechanical issue. The clutch in these things doesn't really stick. Usually it's because the amplifier has sent a signal to the clutch, and by the way, the clutch is like, it's a very powerful spring inside these things. So unless it's getting a signal, it will always release unless like there's something seized inside the actuator and it's a sealed unit. So I doubt that would happen. But the clutch is sort of like a hinge, an electromagnetic hinge, and it, boing, it engages, and then when there's no power, a really powerful spring, boing, disengages it from the control shaft. These cruise control actuators are, for the most part, pretty bulletproof and easily repairable. So you could send them out to the same parties who rebuild the amplifiers to get them worked on. Now here are a couple of other weird symptoms. Let's say you replace both of these and you have a car with an electronic speedometer and still no cruise control. More often than not, there's a detached solder joint in the grid of your electronic speedometer that may be causing this speed signal for the cruise control to not actually get a signal. So you need to look for this. This is really common on early 126s and 107s like the 380 SL. A second scenario I would love to make you guys aware of that's very important is the presence of binding linkages, which can cause all kinds of surging. If your linkage is binding or worn out or not adjusted properly, you can get surging from the cruise control as well as it hunts to try to find and maintain the right speed. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video useful. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel and share it with somebody you know is Classic Mercedes. And if you have any other wisdom about your cruise control system to share with us, please drop it in the comments below. Thank you guys so much.